The conclusion we came to this time around when it came to BEATMAKER 3 versus CUBASIS 3 really surprised me. The offerings that both of these apps are putting up are pretty great. And I think that going forward, it's just going to keep getting closer and closer the better these apps update and integrate, and the more stable they get. It's going to be better for everybody. What is up, creatives? Welcome back. It's Jahrell, your music technologist, here to help you master the tech you need to make music freely. And I am pumped to get into what we have to talk about tonight. But before we do that, if you're in here and you haven't done this yet, definitely subscribe to the channel. We're going to be covering topics like this, apps that are helpful for you for music production, and we're going to be doing stuff like gear reviews and tips and tutorials to help you. So this is going to be a comprehensive review of BEATMAKER 3 and CUBASIS 3, kind of a comparison, if you will, pitting the two apps against each other, kind of just talking about the pluses and minuses of each and trying to help you figure out which one's for you. That's ultimately what we're trying to do here, not try to like have some sort of championship belt match or something like that, because everybody's music production needs are different. So before I get into this disclaimer, I am aware there are a lot of other options when it comes to DAWs. If you choose neither of these, that's cool. That's cool. I'm not sponsored by anybody, either of the two. So yeah, let's dive into it. CUBASIS 3 versus BEATMAKER 3. Both of these are DAWs. That's digital audio workstations for iPad. And CUBASIS actually supports iPhone as well, where BEATMAKER 3 does not. So that's one difference already off the bat. Another thing to consider is price. So let's talk about price first. CUBASIS 3 comes in at $50. So it's not the cheapest DAW on the App Store, but it packs a lot in for that $50, and we're going to talk about that. Sometimes they have it on sale. I just checked, it is not currently on sale, but then we also have BEATMAKER 3. So let's get a little top-down view. BEATMAKER 3 is right here. CUBASIS 3 is right here. BEATMAKER 3 is made by Intua. CUBASIS 3 is made by Steinberg. BEATMAKER 3 goes for $26.99 in the App Store, which I think is a pretty sweet price. It is obviously cheaper than CUBASIS 3, and some might argue that's, that's fair because how much CUBASIS packs in. But let's talk about aesthetics. So we want to talk about how the program looks. When you're using a DAW of any kind, you're kind of drawn to how the layout looks. If it doesn't look right, if it doesn't feel right, it's not going to work for you. So let's start with BEATMAKER 3. This is the first screen you get when you open up BEATMAKER 3. This is your basic layout. Everything's very flat when it comes to BEATMAKER 3. A lot of people, it's a love it or hate it with the BEATMAKER 3 layout. Everything's broken down into tabs. If you haven't yet, watch my video on BEATMAKER 3 Basics, the most recent video, going into exactly what the layout is, how everything works, how you can get started using this if you decide to use BEATMAKER 3 at the end of this. So this is kind of the layout when it comes to BEATMAKER 3. Some love it, some hate it. It's very gray, very monochrome, and it's very flat. The UI for CUBASIS is a lot more dynamic. If you're somebody that's done any desktop music production, you're used to this setup. It looks a lot more like a traditional DAW. You've got, your mixer here, which you can resize, and things like that. So I think CUBASIS 3 personally looks a lot better than BEATMAKER 3 does. I think it's a little bit more cluttered in my personal opinion. Things are kind of everywhere. I mean, once you get the hang of it, obviously you've got it, but there's a lot of different things to remember as far as where everything's located. But it is a much more visually pleasing interface, like when you go into things like your piano roll, and the fact that you can resize everything just like I did so that you can still see your playlist here and do stuff down here. That's a dope feature that CUBASIS has that BEATMAKER 3 does not have. Before I continue on, I just want to mention the reason I'm doing this comparison is because some things have changed since the last time I did a video like this. Some things have been updated for each application, and I'm going to dive into those tonight, so stay tuned, because I might not come to the same conclusion I came to at in the last video. So all right, let's keep it moving. So we got aesthetics. Personally, I think I prefer the way CUBASIS looks much more dynamic, much more colorful. BEATMAKER 3 is much more flatter design. The fact that you can resize things in CUBASIS 3 is super dope. So when it comes to your basic functionality of a DAW, both of these get the job done for the most part. Both host plugins, AUV3 plugins. Some might argue that BEATMAKER 3 is a little more unstable when it comes to AUV3 plugin hosting. Sometimes we get crashes and things like that. I've also noticed recently when using CUBASIS that some of these plugins that I have on my iPad, some of the AUV3s, are flat out not supported in BEATMAKER 3 in comparison to CUBASIS 3. For example, one of those is the Rolly Noise app. The Rolly Noise app does not load as an AUV3 in BEATMAKER 3, and I'm not sure why that is. Now, this is what we need to talk about real quick, is stability. This is a hot topic when it comes to iPad music production, because we run into our fair share of bugs in the iOS community, and I think it's because we don't have giant dev teams doing these things in most cases. Steinberg for CUBASIS 3 tends to be a little bit more frequent with the updates than Intua does. That's something to keep in mind, because if you're having glitches, it might take you some time to get updates from Intua. CUBASIS is generally a little bit quicker with that. But when it comes to stability in general, I've always said that CUBASIS is winning in that department compared to BEATMAKER 3. But as of lately, I feel like it's coming to a bit of a draw. I don't know if anyone else is experiencing this, but I've been getting a fair amount of bugs on CUBASIS 3. I've had projects close out quite a few times, and that's something that was a bit surprising to me. One thing that scares the heck out of me as a music producer when CUBASIS shuts down, when it closes out, is CUBASIS doesn't do manual saving. It's automatic. It automatically saves for you. I'm someone that when I'm producing in BEATMAKER 3 or whatever, I spam the save button to make sure I've saved every step of the way, and I like to know when I press the save button last and what I'm going to get back if we get bugs, you know. CUBASIS 3 does not let you manually save. There's an auto save, and so when it closes out, when it shuts down and it comes back, you may not get the very last thing that you did on there, which is super kind of like, that's kind of sketch. That's something to keep in mind. Now, this isn't something that happens all the time, obviously. So when it comes to stability, I've noticed a few more crashes specifically with plugins on BEATMAKER 3, but I've seen a few more just full-on crashes from CUBASIS 3 lately. Now, BEATMAKER 3 is really surprising me these days. It's been running pretty stable, and I think I've been getting that impression from a lot of other folks too, that they've been having a smoother time with BEATMAKER 3. I haven't had BEATMAKER 3 crashing lately, which is pretty great. So that's something that you got to consider when you're getting into this iOS territory. Now, if you are someone that absolutely has to have full-on stability like all the time, and you're very concerned about that, GarageBand might be something to check out for you. Now, it's a little bit more limited, but it's made by Apple and generally is more stable, but less features, less things you can do with it. The last time I talked about this, CUBASIS I put on top as far more stable, but I don't feel like that's the case anymore. BEATMAKER 3 has gotten more stable, and in my opinion, CUBASIS 3 has gotten less stable. So that's where we're at with that. So next we're going to talk about what things got added to close some of these gaps between the two. In my last video comparing BEATMAKER 3 and CUBASIS 3, I mentioned that one of my biggest gripes with CUBASIS was the fact that you cannot separately affect the pads like you can in BEATMAKER 3. Let me just show you guys what I mean when I say that. So if I pull up BEATMAKER 3 real quick. So in any project, if I go to one of these banks, and you can either hit show pads or you can double tap. If I double tap, here is every single pad separated by channel, and I can individually add effects or, affect the volume. And that's something that CUBASIS 3 for the longest has not done. Now, it still doesn't officially do this, but there are some ways around it because of some developments that have happened in the most recent large update to CUBASIS 3. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about multi-MIDI out. And that is something that you can use kind of in the same way. So for example, I have the plugin called EG Pulse loaded up here in my CUBASIS 3 project. This is kind of like, the Banks tab in BEATMAKER 3, but it's in plugin form. So, really quick, if you're just tuning in, hit that like button. I definitely appreciate it. It definitely helps out the channel. If you're getting value out of this content, you know, you might as well hit it. Might as well. It ain't gonna hurt you none. Just click out, click it, come back. All right. EG Pulse is a great app. It supports multi-MIDI out and kind of allows us to do those things we would like to do with BEATMAKER 3 inside of CUBASIS when it comes to separate mixer channels. So what you can do, I can play stuff in, you know, the way I would normally play stuff in. But then you need to go down here where it says add 15 tracks. Let me see if you can see that. On the left side over here, you see it says add 15 tracks. I'm going to go ahead and hit that, and boom. It's added basically all 16 of the tracks from EG Pulse in here. So if I play anything, everything's separate, and you can see that in the mixer. So let me just record something really quick. All right. Nothing fancy. And let's let that play with the mixer panel open, and you can see we're going to have multiple things moving. So that'll be the last few here. Let's play it. Right? So we've got two separate channels that we're moving, and I can put effects on those individually. So this is kind of a workaround, but it actually is really smooth when it comes to being able to have separate tracks for each pad like you would be able to do natively in BEATMAKER 3. Another thing that's changed with CUBASIS, which is so great, and I kind of talked about this in my last video, but CUBASIS now has the ability to sidechain natively. If you don't know what that means, it's all good. Check out my other videos on sidechaining, but you can sidechain in here natively, and an example of that is when you want your kick to cut through your mix, you need to be able to sidechain, and that's something that BEATMAKER 3 has always done really well, and CUBASIS 3 recently added the ability to do that, and it functions super well. It's super easy to do. You can use either their built-in compressor here in CUBASIS 3, or you can use a third-party compressor, which I think is super dope. That is something that kind of evens the playing field a bit for me when it comes to BEATMAKER 3 versus CUBASIS 3. In CUBASIS 3, I would argue that there's more sounds available, more instruments available on purchase. Now, of course, this DAW costs almost twice as much as BEATMAKER 3, so you would hope there would be more included, and there is. No disappointment there. If you go in to add an instrument, and there's just a list, a pretty solid list. And this is just one synth right here. These are all the different, you know, settings inside of Microsonic. Some of these are in-app purchases. There's a lot of good in-app purchases available for CUBASIS 3. And then obviously you can load in your inter-app audio or your audio units. Now when it comes to BEATMAKER 3, there's the BEATMAKER 3 Sound Store. There's actually 3 free packs that come with BEATMAKER 3 when you buy it. I think those sounds are really solid, but you can also obviously go in and purchase more in the BEATMAKER 3 Sound Store, just like you can purchase additional sounds inside of CUBASIS 3. But CUBASIS 3 has a few more options. One of those options is a pretty important one, and that's the WavesTune plugin, which allows you to auto-tune things. In my opinion, this is the best auto-tuning plugin there is for iPad music production. I've had people ask me about this before. There really isn't anything else that comes this close, in my opinion, when it comes to auto-tuning on your iPad. In BEATMAKER 3, I've tried the one Audio Kit auto-tune plugin, and it crashes a lot. I haven't checked it in a while, but that plugin crashes a lot in BEATMAKER 3. This works really solid. It sounds good. There's still no manual tuning options when it comes to iPad music production, and that's a bummer. But that's neither here nor there when it comes to CUBASIS 3 versus BEATMAKER 3. But people argue, and rightfully so, that BEATMAKER 3 has one of the best samplers out there, and I would agree. It's really powerful, and the settings work really well, and everything's laid out really well, kind of, you know, MPC style, if you will. Now, when it comes to the sampler inside of CUBASIS, it's lacking. It really is lacking. And that brings me to one other point when it comes to the built-in pads in CUBASIS 3. There are pads that you can play things in. This is what they look like. But it is a pain to drag in your samples in here. It really is. In BEATMAKER 3, you can drag things from your Files app directly onto the pads, or you can drag it from your imports inside of BEATMAKER 3. In CUBASIS 3, you can only drag stuff in from the built-in media browser in here, and that's kind of a bummer. And when you do that, you can't put it right onto the pads. No, you've got to go to your keys. You've got to open up a sampler instrument. I'm just going to show you guys the process to do this because it's kind of long. So if I go here, go back from Microsonic, mini sampler is what you got to pull up. I pull up one of my presets. I have a test kit here. If you want to load samples, you got to go into edit, and then you have keys, and you can put your samples from your imports right here, drag it over, and put it on the keys. That does not line it up immediately for your pads, right? So when it comes to your pads, you got to go up here to keys, and then you've got to flip this switch to pads, and you have to hit edit, and then you can select, you have to select drums here, and then you can select which instruments you want to drag over to each pad. That is a lot just to load up some pads, right? So if you're somebody that wants to load up some stuff on some pads and get to drumming, the built-in CUBASIS drum pad is not it. You might be better off using something like EG Pulse. Like I said, you can pull open a slide over app, and you can just, the Files app, pull it over as a slide over, and you can just start dropping your drums. Yeah, you can just boom, drag, boom, and it's in there. That's nice. That's what needs to happen with the built-in pads in CUBASIS 3, and that's not something that we have. So when it comes to managing your files, bringing in your samples and everything, the process is pretty similar, to be honest. It's not too difficult. You just have to manage everything in your Files app, put it in your imports folder, and you're good to go. In BEATMAKER 3, we need to go over to BEATMAKER 3 real quick because some things have changed since my last video about BEATMAKER 3. So I mentioned in my last comparison between these two apps that BEATMAKER 3 was very difficult to duplicate banks, and that is no longer the case. If you want to duplicate something, you couldn't do this before, but you can now. Press and hold on the bank that you want and hit duplicate. Boom. There it is. It's there. And it's exactly that easy in CUBASIS 3 as well. If you want to duplicate something. By the way, all of the MIDI data is here too. It didn't just duplicate the instrument. It duplicated everything I played in right here. Now, when it comes to over here on CUBASIS 3, if I want to duplicate something like this, I just go down here to this button right here and hit duplicate. And there it is. And even the MIDI data as well. Super easy, super similar between the two. That is not something that was a thing in BEATMAKER 3. All right, we're gonna recap this a little bit. We've got CUBASIS 3 versus BEATMAKER 3. Both are solid DAWs. You're not gonna go wrong with them. You definitely have to consider stability when it comes with these two DAWs. They're kind of tied when it comes to stability these days. Also, some things that BEATMAKER 3 does better, has a much better sampler in my opinion. The layout is much easier to learn. I didn't mention that, but the learning curve for BEATMAKER 3 I feel like is much lower than it is on CUBASIS 3. There's a lot to learn, and if you're not familiar with DAWs at all, it might take you longer to learn CUBASIS 3 than it would to learn BEATMAKER 3. When it comes to BEATMAKER 3, some of the AUV3 plugins I use aren't supported. So, you're going to get a better option when it comes to CUBASIS 3, where everything, most things are supported. And most AUV3s function better in CUBASIS 3 than they do in BEATMAKER 3. Less crashes and things like that when it comes to plugins. And then we have price. BEATMAKER 3 is significantly cheaper than CUBASIS 3. CUBASIS 3 comes in at $50. BEATMAKER 3 comes in at $26.99. Now, CUBASIS 3 will include an iPhone app, so you can use CUBASIS 3 on your iPhone. There's no such thing for BEATMAKER 3. I really like this comment by YoServe, and I second this. Both are great. You just got to stick with one and learn it. Yes, I 100% agree. You can make great music in both. I feel like I've done that, not toot my own horn or anything, but it really comes down to what you're willing to learn for each one. If you can come up with a good workflow in CUBASIS 3 and make it happen, or you can come up with a good workflow in BEATMAKER 3 and make it happen, then you're good. You got to find what works for you. And that's why, to be honest, I have both of these DAWs. I recommend both of these DAWs. Earlier in the stream, I think Mobile Music Pro says, or you know what, actually it was Benjamin put in before we even started the stream. His vote was, I vote BEATMAKER 3 for making beats and CUBASIS 3 for vocal recording. And I feel like that's a good mix right there. I think the tracking in CUBASIS 3 and the layout is much better suited for trying to do things like vocals. Things like, you know, I didn't really talk about this, but being able to just edit your volume right here by dragging this down just for the specific clip, not for the whole song, just this particular clip. I want to lower the volume or I want to make a fade out, right? Let me, if I can get it to work. There we go. I can fade it out. That's super easy. Things like that. CUBASIS 3 seems to really think about making things easy to do. But hey, my verdict, as far as my DAW of choice, I'm not going to give my firm decision on BEATMAKER 3 anymore. I really am coming to love both of these, and I think they're both really solid options. If you guys have any questions about BEATMAKER 3 or CUBASIS 3, definitely leave them down in the comment section. Or you could follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and you can DM me there, and I will be happy to share what I know. If you are looking for more BEATMAKER 3 content, definitely check out my BEATMAKER 3 playlist. I feel like just about everything's covered in there. I'm going to do a video soon on automation in BEATMAKER 3, but also I am going to make some more CUBASIS content, so stay tuned for that. The conclusion we came to this time around when it came to BEATMAKER 3 versus CUBASIS 3 really surprised me. The offerings that both of these apps are putting up are pretty great. And I think that going forward, it's just going to keep getting closer and closer the better these apps update and integrate, and the more stable they get. It's going to be better for everybody. So, question of the day. Let me know down in the comments which of the two was your favorite DAW, BEATMAKER 3 or CUBASIS 3. I want to know, and if you're rocking something other than those two, I'd love to hear it down in the comments. That's it, creatives. Go make something dope, and I'll see you in the next video.